We have spent so much time talking about what is on our plates, the macros, the meal timing, the exact physical mechanics of building muscle and losing fat. But today, we are pivoting. We are stepping out of the kitchen, walking away from the gym floor, and venturing into the most complicated, chaotic, and heavily fortified territory of all, the space between our ears. Because here is the reality that nobody wants to admit. You can have the most mathematically perfect meal plan in the world, but when the clock strikes 9 at night, something shifts. The logical brain shuts down, and suddenly, you find yourself staring into the depths of the refrigerator, negotiating with a version of yourself that seems to care absolutely nothing about your long-term goals. It feels like a hijacking. It feels like there is a second, completely separate entity living inside your head, grabbing the steering wheel and driving you straight toward the nearest source of sugar.
That feeling of being hijacked is not a metaphor. It is a biological reality. When that 9 o'clock craving hits, you are not fighting a lack of moral fortitude, and you are certainly not fighting a character flaw. You are going up against millions of years of evolutionary hardwiring that has been violently thrown into a modern environment it was never designed to navigate. We are talking about the deep neuroscience of appetite regulation. We are talking about the exact chemical pathways that dictate human behavior. For decades, we have treated eating as a simple equation of willpower, but clinical neuroscience has completely dismantled that idea. Our relationship with food is governed by a complex, ancient reward system, and at the absolute center of that system is dopamine. If we do not understand how dopamine operates, we are bringing a knife to a gunfight every single time we try to change our habits.
That is exactly what I want to unpack today, because the word dopamine gets thrown around constantly. People talk about dopamine detoxes, or getting a dopamine hit from social media. In the context of food, the assumption is always that dopamine is just the pleasure chemical. We think we eat a piece of cake, it tastes incredible, and our brain releases dopamine to reward us for experiencing that pleasure. But from what the latest research in neurobiology tells us, that is actually a massive misunderstanding of what the molecule is doing, right?
It is a fundamental misunderstanding, and correcting it changes everything about how we view our cravings. Dopamine is not the molecule of pleasure. It is the molecule of motivation, of seeking, of anticipation. It is the drive for more. Think about our ancestors foraging in a scarce environment. If they stumbled across a bush of calorie-dense berries, dopamine was the chemical signal that said, "Remember exactly where this is, remember what it looks like, and do whatever it takes to get back here." Fast forward to today. When you consume highly palatable, ultra-processed, calorie-dense foods, your brain registers an unnaturally massive spike in that exact same chemical. Over time, your nervous system builds a highly efficient, deeply ingrained map of these rewards.
So it is essentially drawing a treasure map in my subconscious, and the X marks the exact shelf where the chocolate chip cookies are hidden.
It is far more insidious than just remembering where the cookies are. Because the dopamine system is designed to drive behavior, it actually starts firing before you even take a bite. The highest peak of dopamine release often happens during the anticipation of the reward, not the consumption of it. When you are driving home from work and you see the glowing sign of a fast food drive-thru, or when the clock hits that magic hour of 9 at night and your brain remembers the pantry, the dopamine floods your system. It creates a state of intense craving, a localized physical tension that demands to be resolved. This is what generates that relentless, exhausting phenomenon we now call food noise. It is that constant, looping internal monologue that will not let you stop thinking about the snack until you finally surrender to it. The tragedy of the modern diet is that the anticipation is often far more powerful than the actual meal.
That completely reframes the entire experience. It explains why the first bite is amazing, but by the fifth bite, you are almost eating unconsciously, just chasing a feeling that has already peaked. And it also highlights a deep cultural reality. We are surrounded by environments that are engineered to trigger this exact response. Food is tied to our social gatherings, our celebrations, our stress relief. It is a deeply rooted, biological, and cultural reward system. So when someone says, just eat less and move more, it feels incredibly dismissive. It feels like telling someone to just stop breathing so heavily while they are drowning.
Precisely. And this brings us to the psychology of dieting and why so many restrictive protocols fail catastrophically. We rely on willpower to bridge the gap between our goals and our biology. But willpower is a finite cognitive resource. It is like a battery. You wake up with a full charge, and you use it all day to deal with traffic, to manage stress at work, to navigate complex social interactions, and to resist the donuts in the break room. By the time evening rolls around, that battery is completely depleted. If you are constantly fighting a highly optimized, dopamine-driven reward system with nothing but raw willpower, you are playing a game you are mathematically destined to lose. The mental fatigue of dieting is real, and it is the primary reason for weight regain.
Which leads us directly into one of the most fascinating shifts in modern medicine. We are seeing a revolution right now, with GLP-1 medications, things like Ozempic and Wegovy. Obviously, they slow gastric emptying and make you feel physically full, but the most profound reports from people taking these medications have nothing to do with their stomachs. They talk about a psychological liberation. They talk about the sudden, shocking silence in their heads.
That silence is the muting of the dopamine reward center. These medications cross the blood-brain barrier and act directly on the receptors that drive that relentless seeking behavior. They do not just stop your stomach from being empty. They essentially turn off the loud radio in your head that has been broadcasting a continuous loop of cravings. For the first time in their lives, many of these patients experience what it is like to look at a highly palatable food and feel absolute neutrality. The food noise is gone. This proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that obesity and chronic overeating are not moral failures. They are neurobiological conditions. When you correct the chemical signaling, the behavior changes effortlessly.
It is incredibly validating, but it also opens up a profound philosophical question. If a weekly injection can completely rewrite my deepest desires and eliminate my cravings, what does that say about free will? We like to believe we are the conscious authors of our choices, but this suggests we are largely at the mercy of our neurochemistry. It is a little unsettling to realize that my profound, deeply personal struggle with late-night snacking was just a chemical imbalance that could be switched off like a light bulb.
It is a humbling realization, without a doubt. It forces us to confront the fact that our environment has outpaced our evolution. We are walking around with ancient hardware in a modern world that is aggressively hacking our neurochemistry for profit. The food industry spends billions of dollars engineering the perfect bliss point, the exact ratio of salt, sugar, and fat required to maximize that dopamine release and ensure you never stop at just one. When you realize that, you stop blaming yourself for falling into the trap. You realize the trap was designed by experts.
So, let us talk about how we fight back. Because not everyone is going to use pharmaceutical interventions, nor should they have to, if they can manage it otherwise. If we are not using medication to mute the radio, how do we manually hack our own biology? How do we recalibrate this dopamine system so we do not end up face first in a pizza every weekend?
We have to look comprehensively at the brain-body connection, and it requires a strategic, multi-tiered approach. You cannot just wish the cravings away. You have to physically alter the environment and your physiological state. The absolute foundation, the protocol that everything else rests upon, is sleep. When you are sleep-deprived, your baseline level of dopamine plummets. Your brain enters a state of mild chemical desperation. Because the baseline is so low, your nervous system starts aggressively seeking out quick, highly concentrated hits of dopamine to compensate for that flat, lethargic feeling. This is why you never crave a crisp salad after a terrible night of sleep. You crave refined carbohydrates and sugar. Securing high-quality sleep is the first line of defense in stabilizing your neurochemistry.
That makes perfect sense. You are essentially patching the holes in the boat before trying to bail out the water. If the baseline is stable, the desperate seeking behavior diminishes. But what about the environment? Because even well rested, if there is a box of pastries on my counter, that dopamine map is going to light up.
Exactly. Which brings us to the second protocol, environmental control. You have to accept that your willpower will fail, and you must design your immediate surroundings to protect you when it does. If the dopamine-triggering food is not physically present in your house, the craving cycle cannot initiate with the same intensity. You are removing the visual and spatial cues that trigger the anticipation. If you have to put on your shoes, find your keys, get in the car, and drive 20 minutes to acquire the junk food, you are inserting a massive friction point into the habit loop. Often, that friction is enough to break the spell. You do not need to be a superhero. You just need to be an architect of your own environment.
I love that framing. Be an architect, not a superhero. It takes the emotion out of it and turns it into logistics. But even with a clean environment and perfect sleep, the human brain still wants a reward. We are still wired to seek. So, if we are taking away the cheap thrill of the ultra-processed food, we cannot just leave a void, right? We have to put something else in its place.
That is the crucial third step. You must actively find and cultivate new, sustainable rewards. The brain needs a target. We have to replace the destructive dopamine hit with constructive alternatives. This is where the psychology of exercise becomes so vital. The physiological phenomenon of the runner's high, or the profound sense of accomplishment and structural adaptation that comes from progressive resistance training, these are potent neurochemical events. They release dopamine, but it is a slow, stable, earned release rather than a chaotic spike and crash. Over time, you can literally rewire your brain to crave the feeling of physical vitality, muscle retention, and metabolic health more than it craves the momentary sedation of junk food.
It is a complete paradigm shift. You are moving from a mindset of deprivation. I am not allowed to have this. I am restricting myself, to a mindset of active, conscious selection. I am choosing this other, much higher quality reward instead. You are taking the power back from the engineered dopamine trap and investing it into sustainable, long-term lifestyle integration. It changes the entire narrative, from suffering to empowerment.
Precisely. And that is the ultimate goal. It is about understanding the underlying mechanism so you can change the resulting behavior. When you finally internalize that, your cravings are just chemical signals, data points from an ancient nervous system trying to survive, and not a reflection of your character or your worth, the shame evaporates. You can stop fighting a phantom war with your own lack of discipline and start practically, methodically managing your biology.
That is such a powerful and necessary shift in perspective. We are moving away from the toxic culture of miracle fat loss claims, the endless cycle of guilt, and the obsession with raw discipline. Instead, we are looking at the deep, undeniable science of how our brains actually function. If you can understand and manage your dopamine, you can manage your behavior. And if you can manage your behavior, you can absolutely master your metabolic health.
It is the most liberating truth in modern health science. We are not broken. We are just operating complex machinery without having read the manual. Once you learn how the levers and gears of your own neurochemistry work, you become the master of your outcomes.
I think that is the perfect place to leave it for today. We have covered a massive amount of ground, from the evolutionary origins of our cravings to the modern pharmaceutical landscape, and finally, to the practical, daily tools we can use to reclaim our minds. It is a lot to process, but it is the foundation of everything we do. Next time, we are going to take these psychological principles and apply them to the physical realm. We will be diving deep into the science of exercise timing. Does it actually matter when you move your body, or is that just another fitness myth? We will break down the biology of exactly when to train for maximum metabolic adaptation and fat loss.
It is going to be a fascinating breakdown. Looking forward to unpacking the chronobiology of training.
Until then, take a look at your environment, protect your sleep, and remember that you are the architect of your own biology. We will catch you on the next episode.